The link between language and identity is, some would argue, is inherent. In the Armenian case, it's very unique because Armenians have been such a long-standing diasporic community, pre-genocide even, that in the absence of a state, language and the church, of course, have functioned as a symbolic homeland. But also, when the nation-state making movement started all over the world, and of course with the Armenians, language was imbued with much higher symbolic value. Some would argue that language was the soul of the people. It was given this heightened status as a marker of identity, as a marker of uniqueness. So I think, of course, language is inherently important, but it's been imbued with extra symbolic value in the process of nationalism and nation-state building. I've given a couple of talks and a couple of papers where I've talked about a linguistic identity crisis among Armenian youth and diasporic communities. And the way it develops is the following. Most young Armenians will self-identify as Armenian. They will also define someone Armenian as someone who speaks Armenian, and I would argue speaks Armenian well. They are socialized into these ideologies that dictate being Armenian as equated to knowing Armenian. And again, I'm going to argue knowing Armenian well. Well, what happens with second and third generation heritage speakers and Armenian youth is that they realize that although they self-identify as Armenian and they define someone Armenian as someone who speaks Armenian well, they themselves don't speak Armenian well because the socializing agents in the community have prioritized the elevated ideologies over the actual language. So, in other words, we are teaching our children the importance of knowing Armenian, but we're not really doing a good job of transmitting Armenian. And here they face this linguistic identity crisis. So how can they be Armenian and not know Armenian? And what happens then? Are they Armenian enough? One of my students in one of my classes wrote this very interesting reflection on Armenian identity where he concluded that the one unchanging, the one constant about being Armenian in the diaspora was not being Armenian enough. And this was highly due to the lacking language proficiency. So if you dare speak your broken Armenian, which is how they will label their Armenian, then you're criticized for your not good enough Armenian. If you dare not speak Armenian at all, then you're criticized for not being a good enough Armenian. Right? So in either scenario, you're not good enough, whether it's in your proficiency in terms of the Armenian language or in your performance of your Armenianness or your Armenian identity. For all of the heritage speakers I've studied, Eastern or Western, of course this fragile diasporic existence is something that's constantly on their mind. So we were persecuted, we are a small people, and there is still this sense of continued persecution. And we must transmit our heritage. And if we don't, then we will be kind of putting in the final nail on the coffin. There is this sense of, I am the one responsible. It stops with me. So language has gone from just an implicit vernacular, an instrumental tool of communication, to a moral obligation. To you as an individual are responsible for the preservation and transmission of an entire heritage. And because of your lacking language proficiency, now you can't. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but when you invest the language with so much symbolic value, when you literally put it on a pedestal, it becomes inaccessible. It becomes intangible. It becomes not practical. But we forget that at its core, language is a means of communication. Language is a tool. What we've done in the Armenian communities is we've made language an end to things Armenian, to a validation of your Armenian heritage, when in reality it needs to be an instrumental tool that you use to discover the world. We've actually limited its scope by putting it on a pedestal, by putting it in a glass box in a museum. We've made it inaccessible for our children. Also because I think for some it's viewed as a burden, it's viewed as an obligation, and it's viewed as something that's static and not dynamic. Because identity is constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly developing, and when they feel like they have something that restricts that evolution, sometimes the easier choice is just to cast it off. I think to constantly prescribe a sort of monolithic Armenian identity that has a checklist of things that need to be checked off is turning off a lot of Armenian youth. So for the youth who self-identify as Armenian and also identify language as one of the key markers of Armenian identity, then when they're in this linguistic identity crisis in, how can they be Armenian if they are not proficient in Armenian, they have a couple of options. So it's either divest from their Armenianness or find other markers. So an Armenianness that is convenient, an Armenianness that is a matter of choice, an Armenianness that depends on elements of the culture that you can incorporate at will. So whether that's eating Armenian food, listening to music, dancing, maybe less demanding constituents of Armenian identity. And I think in general, at least in the LA community, but it seems again in many of the Western communities, language has been deprioritized as a key marker of Armenian identity, and less demanding constituents such as possessing an Armenian spirit or contributing to the Armenian cause, investing in the Republic of Armenia, these have been highlighted as markers of Armenian identity.